Chapter 1. Smoke and shadows. The rain in the capital, Changjian, wasn't a gentle weeping. It was a relentless, oily drumming, a gray curtain obscuring the grandeur of the imperial city and turning the already saturated streets into a slick, shimmering maze. I, Shen Wei, heir to the Shen Merchant Guild and Grandmaster of the Eternal Ember, a title whispered in hushed tones among the highest echelons of martial power, was currently knee-deep in it, scrubbing soot from a particularly stubborn wok at the Jade Blossom teahouse. The work was monotonous, a slow, deliberate peeling of grime and regret. It was, I had decided, the perfect camouflage. The Shen merchants weren't known for their subtlety. Their wealth, accumulated over centuries of shrewd trading and occasionally less-than-legal dealings, radiated outwards like a magnetic field, drawing attention, suspicion, and most importantly, the avaricious eyes of those who desired a piece of it. Hiding as a kitchen porter, a clumsy, soot-covered fool, was the only way I could hope to maintain a semblance of peace amidst the chaos of my family's legacy. The Jade Blossom was a mid-tier establishment, frequented mostly by merchants, disgruntled officials, and a particularly irritating collection of young noblemen known as the Golden Tigers. They were, to put it mildly, a menace. They treated the staff with contempt, often engaging in petty displays of martial prowess, mostly crude karate and boastful posturing to assert their dominance. And at the head of this boisterous pack was Lord Feng. Feng was everything I wasn't confident, arrogant, and utterly lacking in self-awareness. Had secured his captaincy not through merit or skill, but through a hefty bribe to a complacent Imperial Guard officer. He swaggered through the teahouse like he owned it, his crimson silks and ostentatious gold ring a stark contrast to the worn wooden tables and perpetually stained floor. He was a weapon of boredom and disdain, and I was his intended target. "Look at him," he guffawed, gesturing with a dismissive wave towards me as I struggled to maneuver a sack of rice across the tiled floor. "Honestly, a peasant is born of the mud and will return to it. Perhaps he should be scrubbing pig stools instead of tea leaves." He deliberately bumped into me, sending a cascade of rice spilling across the floor. A shame, really. Could have been useful for something. A small crowd of the Golden Tigers erupted in laughter, their amusement fueled by my carefully cultivated clumsiness. They clearly relished watching me, a man who could manipulate the very flow of heat, reduced to this state of apparent incompetence. I gritted my teeth, muttered a silent apology to the spilled rice, and continued my task, the damp chill of the rain seeping through my threadbare tunic. The only flicker of decency in this dreary scene was Xiao-Ni, a blind street musician who performed just outside the teahouse. She was a wisp of a woman, her face etched with the hardships of a life lived on the fringes of the city, her fingers nimble and quick on the strings of her pipa. She wasn't interested in my clumsy efforts or the boisterous antics of the Golden Tigers. She simply played, her music, a mournful, intricate tapestry woven from the sounds of the rain and the city. She offered me a handful of copper coins, a meager offering, but a kindness nonetheless, and I accepted with a nod. "You scrub too hard, Shen Wei," she said, her voice soft and melodic, devoid of judgment. "You'll wear yourself out." I mumbled something about the constant demands of the head cook, but secretly, I was grateful for her presence. Her unwavering focus on the beauty of her music reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten, that there was beauty to be found even in the most mundane of things. As an afterthought, I discreetly repaired a crack in her pipa soundboard, using a sliver of polished jade ID liberated from one of the merchant's coffers. I applied a thin layer of resin and carefully glued the piece back together, disguising the repair with a simple coating of varnish, making it look like a routine, almost accidental fix. The cycle continued. I scrubbed, I carried, I endured the Golden Tiger's mockery, and Xiao-Ni offered her coins and her music. A strange, symbiotic relationship had formed, built on quiet gestures and unspoken understandings. Then the storm broke. Not just the rain, but a chaos that threatened to unravel everything. A squad of heavily armored men, clearly assassins, burst through the teahouse doors, their faces grim, their swords drawn. They were targeting the visiting nephew of the emperor, a young man named Prince John, who was currently enjoying a rare, and decidedly unpopular, visit to the capital. Lord Feng, predictably, puffed out his chest and bellowed, "Fear not, gentlemen. I, Captain Feng, will defend us." He attempted a clumsy karate chop, missing the assassin entirely and staggering backwards. The assassins, unmoved, continued their assault, targeting the patrons with ruthless precision. And then, Xiao-Ni was shoved. A single, brutal movement, driven by a man who valued his own life above all else. The assassin's blade arced towards her, a flash of steel poised to end her life. But before the steel could connect, the air around us shimmered, distorting the light. The temperature within the teahouse skyrocketed, becoming an unbearable searing heat. The assassins froze, their movements sluggish, their eyes wide with disbelief. And I, Shen Wei, the kitchen porter, the supposed fool, stepped forward. Chapter 2. The Embers Awakening. The shift was utterly, horrifyingly silent. It wasn't a shout, a crash, or even a gasp. It was a pull, a visceral tightening in the chest, a sense of everything around me twisting slightly out of focus. The scent of charcoal and boiled ginger intensified, rising to an almost choking level. The hammering of the assassin's blades against the wooden tables ceased. Even the terrified shouts of the teahouse patrons faded, replaced by a ringing in my ears. I hadn't consciously decided to act. It was as though a switch had been flipped within me, a long dormant mechanism grinding into furious operation. My muscles, previously heavy with exhaustion and ingrained deference, became taut, coiled springs of impossible strength. The soot-stained apron felt suddenly constricting, a ridiculous barrier to a power I was only just beginning to understand. The assassins, 5 men clad in black steel and radiating cold, arrogant confidence, were frozen mid-swing. Their faces, momentarily illuminated by the flickering lamplight, displayed a confusion that bordered on terror. One, a particularly large man with a scarred cheek, let his sword clatter to the floor with a dull thud. I moved, not with the jerky, hesitant movements of the kitchen porter I pretended to be. This was different. This was a channeling of something ancient, something primal. My feet barely touched the ground as I moved, a heat haze coalescing around me, blurring the edges of the room. The first assassin lunged, his broadsword a silver blur aimed at the throat of a terrified merchant huddled behind a table. Before the blade could even register a flicker of movement, I intercepted. It was a single, almost impossibly precise strike, a movement so fast it seemed to defy physics. 2 fingers not braced, not forceful, but delicately positioned wrapped around the point of the blade. The sound was a horrifying crack, like bones splintering against ice. The steel, impossibly dense in cold moments before, immediately began to glow with an infernal cherry-red light. It warped, twisted and shattered, collapsing into a pile of useless fragments. The assassin staggered back, clutching at his arm, his eyes wide with a fear that wasn't just of death, but of something utterly alien and terrifying. I didn't press the attack. There was no need. The stunned silence of the room, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal, spoke volumes. My movements, fueled by this unleashed power, were unsettlingly graceful, almost hypnotic. Each strike was calculated, efficient, radiating a heat that shimmered in the air. The second assassin, a wiry man with unsettlingly sharp eyes, attempted to flank me, drawing a wickedly curved dagger. Again, the same instinctive response, the same blinding speed. This time, I didn't need to touch the blade. The heat alone was enough. The dagger's polished steel melted, leaving behind a blackened, unrecognizable lump. Word spread through the teahouse like a wildfire. The murmuring chatter ceased. The terrified patrons began to slowly rise, their eyes fixed on me with a mixture of awe, horror, and disbelief. Lord Feng, frozen in his clumsy karate stance, was a picture of abject terror. The Imperial Guard, alerted by the commotion, burst through the teahouse doors, a wall of polished bronze and disciplined swords. Captain Lin, a stern-faced man with a reputation for ruthlessness, immediately barked orders, ordering his men to secure the area. He surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on me, a flicker of something akin to recognition in his eyes. "By the Emperor's grace," he said, his voice tight with controlled surprise. "What sorcery is this?" Before anyone could respond, I turned my attention to Lord Feng, who was whimpering behind a table, attempting to disappear into the shadows. "You used her," I said, my voice low and controlled, carrying a weight that belied my humble appearance. "You sacrificed her for your own vanity." I stepped towards him, and the air around me shimmered once more. The heat intensified, and this time, the effect was more deliberate, targeted. A small, controlled blast of heat singed the sleeve of his uniform, leaving a jagged, blackened line that reached halfway up his arm. "You will learn," I said, turning back to Captain Lin, "that some things are best left undisturbed." The Imperial Guard, witnessing this impossible display of power, fell to their knees. The chaos dissolved into stunned silence. I didn't order them to rise. They did it themselves, compelled by the sheer force of the energy emanating from me. As they rose, Captain Lin, recovering his composure, gestured for them to arrest Lord Feng. But before any of them could move, I was already beside Xiao-Ni. "Come," I said, my voice softer now. "It's time we went home." I reached out, gently taking her hand. The warmth radiating from my body seemed to soothe her, calming the tremor in her limbs. As I led her out of the teahouse, the chaos behind us slowly began to settle, replaced by the stunned silence of a capital city witnessing the awakening of a legend. Chapter 3: Echoes of Ember. The humid air of the imperial capital clung to us like a damp shroud as we navigated the labyrinthine streets. Xiao-Ni had a comforting weight in mine. The initial chaos of the teahouse had receded, leaving a residue of stunned disbelief and hushed whispers. Even the usually boisterous merchants eyed us with a mixture of fear and awe, recognizing the power that had manifested with such devastating clarity. Captain Lin and a contingent of Imperial Guard, initially frozen in stunned silence, now moved with a measured efficiency, escorting a visibly shaken Lord Feng, a pale, whimpering shadow of his former arrogant self, to the city's gates. We traveled towards the Shen estate, a sprawling complex nestled on the outskirts of the city, a place that had until recently been a source of both shame and immense pressure. The journey was punctuated by curious glances, nervous inquiries, and the occasional whispered accusation of sorcery. I answered them all with carefully crafted neutrality, a practiced facade of a simple kitchen porter. The truth, of course, was far more complex, woven with generations of martial prowess, and a secret flame that burned beneath a carefully constructed exterior. As we drew closer to the estate, the air itself seemed to shift, becoming subtly warmer. The stone walls, once gray and imposing, seemed to radiate a faint, comforting heat. The servants, initially awestruck, now regarded us with hesitant deference, their movements quick and efficient. It was a jarring contrast to the cold contempt of Lord Feng and the wary suspicion of the city. Finally, we arrived at the main courtyard, dominated by a tranquil pool reflecting the bruised purple of the twilight sky. My family's steward, a wizened old man named Master Zhao, greeted us with a formal bow, his eyes holding a flicker of profound surprise. "Master Shen," he said, his voice raspy with age, "welcome home. We had feared the worst, believing you lost to the city's misery." "The worst has been averted," I replied, offering a curt nod. "And we have brought a guest." I gestured towards Xiao-Ni, who stood quietly beside me, observing the familiar surroundings with a cautious curiosity. The estate's healers, summoned with unparalleled speed, were already preparing a room at the heart of the complex, a space of cool, polished jade and intricate silk tapestries. They had been dispatched by Captain Lin himself, a testament to the urgency of restoring Xiao-Ni's sight. As they worked, meticulously examining her eyes, the questions surrounding the events at the teahouse continued to swirl. The Emperor, alerted to the situation, had dispatched a delegation of advisors, each keen to understand the nature of this newfound power and its implications for the dynasty. I kept my answers carefully measured, deliberately vague about the details of the eternal ember. I spoke of training, of discipline, of a long-lost martial art rediscovered within the family's archives. I painted a picture of rigorous dedication, hinting at a profound connection to the natural world, but never revealing the true extent of my abilities. It was a calculated performance, designed to manage expectations and deflect unwanted scrutiny. As the hours passed, a small team of my older cousins, who had spent their lives studying and honing their martial skills, arrived. They were a formidable group, a traditional force of skilled warriors, but they regarded me with an almost palpable mixture of awe and suspicion. Shen Wei, my cousin Jian the eldest, said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of restrained excitement. The rumors, they were true. The Eternal Ember. It is a legend whispered in the halls of the Imperial Academy, a technique deemed impossible, a myth. He paused, observing the effect my power had had on his companions. Your controllet's remarkable. It demands a level of stillness, a focus that few possess. Before he could press further, I shifted my attention back to Xiao-Ni, who was patiently waiting, her face serene despite the chaos. The physicians are making progress, I said, my voice softening. Soon she will see the world as it truly is. I felt a familiar warmth radiating from my core, a subtle pulse of energy that resonated with Xiao-Ni's own. Without conscious thought, I extended my hand, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. As I did, the room seemed to shimmer once more, and the temperature rose noticeably. This time, however, the effect was not one of destruction. Instead, a faint golden light enveloped Xiao-Ni's eyes. She gasped, her hand flying to her face. I see, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The music, it's not just sound. It's light, color, emotion, it's a symphony of existence. Tears streamed down her face, tears of joy and relief. I watched, a quiet sense of profound satisfaction filling me. This was more than just restoring her sight. It was granting her a glimpse into the heart of my own power, a shared connection forged in the crucible of a moment. As she began to tentatively play her pipa, the melodies that flowed from the instrument were no longer simple tunes. They were vibrant, breathtaking expressions of beauty, echoing the warmth of the ember and the brilliance of a world newly revealed. The imperial advisors, witnessing this extraordinary scene, fell silent, their faces etched with astonishment and a nascent understanding of the force I commanded. The rumors had been true, and I, Shen Wei, the humble kitchen porter, was undeniably a god. Chapter 4. The Emperors. Question. The silence after Xiao-Ni's miraculous recovery hung thick in the sandalwood music hall, broken only by the tentative notes of her pipa. Imperial advisors, men who'd spent their lives navigating the labyrinthine politics of the court, sat motionless, faces a mixture of bewildered respect and thinly veiled apprehension. Lord Minister Zhao, a wizened scholar known for his skepticism and love of meticulously documented scrolls, was the first to break the spell. Grandmaster Shen, he said, his voice carefully measured, the rumors surrounding your training have circulated for decades. Whispers of a martial art born of fire, of a hidden heir to the Shen Guild. We dismiss them as the fanciful tales of drunken merchants and jealous rivals. Yet, what we have witnessed it defies explanation. He gestured subtly towards the shimmering residual heat clinging to the air, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of Xiao-Ni music. The alteration of metal to ash, the impossible sped suggests a power beyond the comprehension of even the most seasoned warriors. Emperor Jianlong, a man known for his pragmatism and deep-seated distrust of ambition, entered the hall, accompanied by a retinue of guards. He was a powerful figure, sculpted by years of governing a vast empire, yet there was a palpable tremor of curiosity in his gaze as he observed Xiao-Ni. He had summoned Shen Wei, not out of a desire for immediate retribution. Feng was already toiling in the teahouse kitchens, a spectacle of humbled arrogance, but out of a deeply ingrained need to understand the unknown. "Grandmaster," the Emperor began, his voice carrying a quiet authority, "the legends of the Eternal Ember speak of a warrior who could extinguish armies with a single breath. Is this truth, or merely a romanticized fable?" Shen Wei remained calm, meticulously wiping down a table with a damp cloth, his movements imbued with a contained grace that belied the devastating power he possessed. Had been trained in the art of deception, of presenting a facade of quiet subservience to mask the immense force within. But this was different. This wasn't about hiding, it was about revealing. "The legends, Your Majesty, are rooted in reality," he replied, his voice low and resonant. "The Eternal Ember is a method of channeling the Earth's internal heat, a technique honed over generations within the Shen Guild. However, it is not merely about destruction. It is about control, about harnessing a force for creation, for protection." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "I chose to conceal my identity, to live amongst the people, not to wield power as a weapon. I sought peace, not dominion." He glanced at Xiao-Ni, who was now lost in a rapturous performance, her music transforming the room into a haven of shimmering color and emotion. "But I see now that even in obscurity, this power can be used for good." The Emperor studied Shen Wei, his eyes narrowed in assessment. "You speak of control. Can you demonstrate this control?" Without a word, Shen Wei moved. He picked up a delicate porcelain teacup from the table, a masterpiece crafted by a renowned artisan. With a controlled gesture, he focused, a faint golden light emanating from his palms. The teacup didn't shatter. Instead, it began to subtly warm, the porcelain glowing with an internal luminescence. He directed the heat, not in a destructive burst, but in a delicate, precise flow. The cup's surface shifted, reshaping itself into a miniature, intricate phoenix, frozen in mid-flight, a testament to the ember's potential for artistry. The room erupted in murmurs of astonishment. The Imperial Guard shifted uneasily, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. Lord Minister Zhao frantically scribbled in his scroll, attempting to capture the impossible demonstration. "Remarkable," the Emperor finally said, a flicker of genuine awe in his voice. "It appears the legend was not entirely a fable. But tell me, Grandmaster, this eternal ember, it demands a price, does it not? The alteration of metal, the rapid exhaustion of the body, what sustains this power?" Shen Wei closed his eyes for a moment, drawing upon the ember, feeling the familiar surge of heat within him. "It sustains itself with balance, Your Majesty, with understanding. It requires a connection to the natural world, to the flow of energy that binds all things. And, perhaps most importantly, it requires a true heart, free from greed and ambition." He opened his eyes, meeting the Emperor's gaze directly. "I found that connection in the music of a blind woman, who could not see my soot, but heard the fire within my soul." He subtly nodded towards Xiao-Ni, who continued to play, the notes now imbued with a palpable sense of serenity and power. The Emperor observed her for a long moment, then turned back to Shen Wei, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "there is more to power than the manipulation of forces. Perhaps true strength lies in the capacity to inspire, to heal, to reveal the beauty hidden within the ordinary. He paused, then added, with a touch of unexpected sincerity, "Continue your work, Grandmaster. The Empire will benefit from your unique talents." As the Emperor departed, followed by his advisors, a new understanding dawned within Shen Wei. He wasn't merely a warrior, he was a catalyst, a bridge between worlds. And perhaps, just perhaps, his humble existence as a kitchen porter had finally found its true purpose. Chapter 5. The serpents coil the days following the teahouse. Incident settled into a cautious routine, a fragile peace built on the lingering heat of the ember and the Emperor's unexpectedly astute observation. Shen Wei, still clad in the rough-spun tunic of a kitchen porter, found himself subtly, almost obsessively, focused on understanding the limits of his power. The initial burst of raw energy had left him drained, a dull ache thrumming through his bones. Yet the experience had ignited a desperate need for control, for knowledge. He began to meticulously record his movements. The precise intake of breath, the internal focus had developed, and the subtle shifts in temperature he felt. Xiao-Ni, meanwhile, blossomed under the attention of the Shen estate. The physicians, renowned for their integration of traditional herbal remedies with what was whispered to be celestial techniques, were baffled and intrigued by her rapidly recovering sight. They attributed to Shen Wei's careful ministrations, attributing her recovery to the harmonious flow of qi towards him day. Shen Wei, ever pragmatic, simply ensured they used the finest ingredients and skillfully applied their knowledge. He didn't reveal the truth, allowing the whispers to circulate that a kind, mysterious porter possessed a touch of magic, a secret influence over the healing arts. But the peace was not to last. The rumors surrounding Shen Wei's actions at the tea house had reached Lord Zhao, a powerful and notoriously ruthless member of the Emperor's Council known for his mastery of serpents, coil a martial art focused on constriction and incapacitation. Zhao, a man sculpted from jade and ice, was rumored to have once been a student of the legendary warrior, Zhao Long, whose techniques were said to have been so devastating they could crush a man's bones with a thought. Zhao believed Shen Wei's display had been an act of arrogance, a reckless flaunting of power that threatened the established order. Zhao arrived at the Shen estate a week later, not with a formal delegation, but with a small, unnervingly silent entourage. He was a study in controlled menace, his movements economical and precise, his eyes radiating a chilling intelligence. He bypassed the guards, a subtle nod from the chief steward granting him access to the kitchen. Shen Wei, scrubbing the floor, felt his presence like a sudden drop in temperature, a prickling on the back of his neck. "Shen Wei," Zhao said, his voice a low rumble, "I've heard tales of your abilities. Tales of a porter who can melt steel." He circled Shen Wei slowly, examining him with a predatory gaze. "I'm Lord Zhao. I believe you possess a gift that needs to be understood, controlled, or if necessary, contained." Shen Wei remained silent, his hand instinctively reaching for the worn leather pouch containing a small, polished piece of jade, a focus for channeling the ember. He knew confrontation was not an option. Zhao's techniques, rumored to be built upon manipulating the flow of qi, would be disastrously effective against someone relying on raw, untamed power. Suddenly, a young apprentice, Lin, one of the young musicians Xiao-Ni had trained, stumbled into the kitchen, a look of terror etched on his face. "Lord Zhao! Guards! They've discovered the map. The location of the Imperial Dragon Seal." Chaos erupted. The map, a meticulously detailed scroll charting the location of the Dragon Seal, a powerful artifact capable of controlling the flow of water across the Empire, had been stolen from the Emperor's vault. It was a catastrophe of immense proportions, capable of destabilizing the entire dynasty. Zhao, a cruel smile playing on his lips, seized the opportunity. "This is a fascinating development, Grandmaster," he said, addressing Shen Wei directly. The loss of the dragon seal is merely a prelude. It appears you have a vested interest in protecting the Emperor's interests. He began to move, executing a swift, fluid sequence of serpent's coil techniques, targeting Shen Wei's joints, aiming to restrict his movement. Shen Wei reacted instantly, not with a blast of heat, but with a deliberate, calculated defense. He sidestepped Zhao's attacks with uncanny grace, moving as if flowing through water, deflecting blows with controlled blocks, and using Zhao's momentum against him. It wasn't about overwhelming power, it was about perfect timing, about disrupting the flow of Zhao's attack. He realized, with a chilling clarity, that Zhao was not simply testing his strength. He was studying him, analyzing him. He was, Shen Wei understood, attempting to decipher the core of the eternal ember, to understand the balance that sustained it, the connection to the natural world, the true heart that the Emperor had spoken of. As Shen Wei deflected a particularly forceful strike, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer of heat pulsed from his hand. It wasn't a deliberate attack, but a reflexive response, a ripple in the tapestry of energy he unconsciously manipulated. Zhao froze, his eyes widening in a flicker of genuine surprise. The serpent's coil, designed for constriction and control, faltered momentarily, struggling against an unseen force. The air in the kitchen thickened with heat, and a low, resonant hum filled the room, carrying within it the faint echo of the eternal ember. The game had shifted, and Shen Wei, disguised as a simple kitchen porter, was now locked in a deadly contest of wills. Chapter 6. The stillness before the storm, the immediate aftermath of the teahouse massacre, was a bizarre tableau of reverence and fear. The Imperial Guard, a regiment of polished bronze and arrogant swagger, now stood frozen, their faces pale beneath their helmets, as they witnessed the destruction wrought by Shen Wei's single, terrifying display. Lord Feng, stripped of his captain's insignia and his opulent silks, was meticulously scrubbing the soot from a wok, his shoulders slumped with an agonizing awareness of his shame. He avoided any direct eye contact, his movements jerky and subdued, a stark contrast to the boisterous arrogance had so recently projected. The Emperor, summoned from his opulent palace, arrived with a delegation of advisors, his expression a carefully cultivated mask of neutrality. He observed Shen Wei, not with accusation, but with a keen, unsettling curiosity. "The Grandmaster," he stated, his voice carrying an unexpected weight, revealed a power, a dormant flame. "It is a wonder and a danger." He gestured towards Xiao-Ni, who sat serenely by the doorway, meticulously repairing a broken string on her pipa. "The young musician has witnessed this miracle. Her testimony shall be invaluable." The weeks that followed were a carefully orchestrated dance of investigation and quiet intimidation. Imperial scholars, renowned in the study of ancient arts and martial philosophies, descended upon the Shen estate, meticulously examining the remnants of the teahouse, analyzing the scorched metal, and interviewing witnesses, all of whom offered accounts of a blinding heat, a shimmering distortion, and a sudden, inexplicable end to the assassins' lives. The whispers surrounding Shen Wei grew to a fervent murmur. Some believed him a demon, a conduit for dark energies; others, a divinely appointed protector, a living embodiment of righteous fury. But the true investigation wasn't about proving or disproving the existence of the eternal ember. It was about understanding him. The Emperor, ever cautious, dispatched Master Li, a legendary martial arts sage known for his impenetrable logic and unsettlingly perceptive gaze, to directly observe Shen Wei. Li, a man of few words and even fewer smiles, arrived bearing no weapons, only a simple bamboo flute. For 3 days, he remained within the confines of the estate, a silent, watchful presence. He spent his time sitting with Shen Wei as he meticulously maintained the estate's gardens, demonstrating an almost unsettling attention to the subtle shifts in the wind, the growth patterns of the plants, and the rhythm of the rain. It was during one of these quiet sessions, as Shen Wei was pruning a rosebush, that Li finally spoke. "You are attempting to hide," he observed, his voice a low rumble. "But the eternal ember does not seek concealment. It seeks resonance." Shen Wei paused, carefully placing the shears down. "I sought peace," he said, his voice carefully measured. "A quiet life, away from the grasping hands of my family." Li nodded slowly. "Peace is an illusion. Power is not something to be avoided, but something to be understood. The ember does not burn for destruction. It burns for balance. You are suppressing it, attempting to control it, which is a futile endeavor. You are a conduit, not a master." He raised his flute and began to play. The notes were not flamboyant or impressive, but a slow, deliberate melody, mimicking the rustling of leaves, the murmur of a stream. As he played, Shen Wei felt a subtle shift within him, a loosening of the internal tension he had so carefully cultivated. Suddenly, Zhao returned. Had been quietly, relentlessly pursuing the investigation, convinced Shen Wei was a dangerous anomaly, a threat to the established order. Zhao, a disciple of the serpent's coil, a style predicated on crippling pressure points and relentless suffocating holds, was a specialist in disrupting martial flow. He arrived with a small group of his most skilled students, armed with intricately crafted iron chains and weighted gloves, and a single chilling directive from the emperor: observe, analyze, neutralize adore. Zhao's approach was methodical, brutally efficient. He began with a series of precise, calculated movements, targeting Shen Wei's joints with the coil's signature technique: subtle pressure on the spine, tightening around the wrists, a focused assault on the solar plexus. Shen Wei responded with a measured defense, relying on the instinctive fluidity of the ember, redirecting Zhao's attacks with seemingly effortless grace. But this time, something was different. Li, who had been silently observing from the shade of a maple tree, suddenly stepped forward, his flute held aloft. He began to play, a counterpoint to Zhao's relentless assault, a rhythmic pulse of energy that subtly disrupted the serpent's coil's suffocating pressure. The air around Shen Wei shimmered with heat. Zhao, sensing the shift, paused, his face contorted with frustration. He realized, with a chilling certainty, that he wasn't fighting a simple warrior. He was fighting a force he couldn't comprehend, a presence that seemed to actively resist his efforts. He lunged, unleashing a full-force attack, a desperate attempt to overwhelm Shen Wei. Before Zhao could complete the strike, Shen Wei shifted, not with a burst of heat, but with an almost unsettling stillness. He stood perfectly motionless, a statue carved from heat and shadow, absorbing the force of the attack, and then, with a single, decisive movement, he shattered Zhao's weighted glove, sending shards of iron scattering across the courtyard. The air thickened with a palpable intensity, the hum of the eternal ember resonating with a newfound power. The game, once again, had fundamentally shifted. Chapter 7. The Echo of the Ember. The dust settled, a fine gray film coating the courtyard after Shen Wei's demonstration. Lord Feng, stripped of his captain's insignia and his opulent robes, shuffled listlessly amongst the imperial guard, scrubbing at the mud caked onto his boots. The laughter of the onlookers had faded, replaced by a stunned silence, punctuated only by the gentle plucking of Xiao-Ni's pipa. But the air still held a faint, tingling warmth, a ghostly reminder of the devastation Shen Wei had wrought. Li, the flute master, lowered his instrument, his face etched with a thoughtful frown. "That was remarkable," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "The serpent's coil is a demanding style. It relies on relentless pressure, a tightening of the spirit. Yet, he simply absorbed it. It's as if he offered himself as a blank canvas for the attack, then used that very canvas to destroy it." Shen Wei, leaning against a pillar of polished jade, observed them with a calm that bordered on unnerving. The scent of burnt metal clung to his clothes, a subtle signature of the ember's power. "The eternal ember is not about brute force," he said, his voice low. "It's about understanding the flow of energy, the vulnerability within every attack. It's about recognizing that resistance is often the strongest defense." Xiao-Ni, her fingers moving deftly over her pipa, offered him a small pouch filled with dried ginger root, a traditional remedy for bruises. "You carry the heat of 1,000 suns, Master Shen," she said, her voice soft. "You must be weary." "Rest is a luxury I can ill afford," he replied, accepting the ginger with a quiet gratitude. He had noticed, over the past few days, a subtle drain on his energy, a consequence of constantly suppressing the ember's full potential. Maintaining a disguise demanded a meticulous control, a conscious effort to remain the unassuming kitchen porter. But tonight, the unveiling had been a jarring, almost painful, release. As they prepared to leave the imperial grounds, a figure emerged from the shadows. Master Zhao, the renowned serpent's coil warrior, his face a mask of bitter frustration. He approached Shen Wei, not with aggression, but with a guarded curiosity. "Grandmaster," he said, his voice measured, "I concede. I was wrong to underestimate you. Your technique, it defies explanation. It's as if you possess a connection to something beyond mortal understanding." Shen Wei met his gaze unflinchingly. "The ember's an ancient art, Master Zhao. It has been refined over centuries. It is not about magic, but about discipline, about understanding the deepest currents of energy within the human body." He paused, a flicker of something akin to sadness crossing his face. "And sometimes it is about choosing to remain hidden, to protect those you care about from the darkness." Suddenly, a piercing shriek echoed through the courtyard. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, one of Xiao-Ni's most prized possessions, lay shattered at her feet. Before anyone could react, a man materialized from the entrance to the teahouse, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with a disconcerting swiftness, radiating an aura of suppressed fury. "You cannot hide your power forever, Shen Wei," the man hissed, his voice thick with a contemptuous arrogance. The ironclad assassins were not merely hired killers. They were dispatched by the serpent's coil. "We were sent to test your strength, to gauge your potential. And you have exceeded all expectations." The man revealed himself to be Captain Lu, a veteran of the Imperial Guard, known for his ruthlessness and his mastery of the Shadow Serpent style, a technique renowned for its stealth and deadly precision. Lu was a disciple of Zhao, and the simmering rivalry between the two warriors had been a silent threat throughout the investigation. Before Shen Wei could react, Lu launched a series of rapid strikes, utilizing a flurry of concealed blades and poison darts. The air filled with the whirring of steel and the stinging scent of aconite. Shen Wei, despite his exhaustion, responded with surprising agility. He used the ember not to unleash a raging inferno, but to create subtle distortions in the air, deflecting Lu's attacks with barely perceptible movements. He focused on disrupting Lu's rhythm, targeting the pressure points of his limbs, crippling his attacks before they could fully materialize. But Lu was a seasoned warrior, and he recognized the shift in Shen Wei's power. He adjusted his tactics, launching a series of relentless close-range assaults. Just as Lu's momentum threatened to overwhelm Shen Wei, Li stepped forward, his flute once again his weapon. He began to play, a frantic, urgent melody, a chaotic counterpoint to Lu's aggressive technique. The music seemed to amplify the heat around Shen Wei, allowing him to channel the ember with greater intensity. And then, as before, the air shimmered, the metal red-hot, and the realization dawned upon Lu. He was fighting a force beyond his comprehension, a storm of controlled destruction. This time, however, Shen Wei didn't simply neutralize Lu's attacks. With a controlled burst of heat, he forced the captain to instinctively recoil, singeing the sleeve of his armor. As Lu retreated, defeated, Shen Wei turned to Xiao-Ni, who was staring at him with wide, unwavering eyes. "The flame," she whispered. "I saw it again." Chapter 8. The cartographer of heat, the aftermath of the teahouse massacre, settled like a fine, unsettling dust over the imperial capital. The emperor, a shrewd and pragmatic man named Zhao, was, predictably, less concerned with the specifics of the assassination attempt and more focused on the unsettling display of raw power that had unfolded beneath his very nose. Lord Feng, stripped of his captaincy and reduced to scrubbing the hearths of the imperial kitchen, moved with a sullen, diminished grace. The whispers surrounding Shen Wei, now officially identified as Shen Wei, of the Shen Merchant Guild, grew louder, laced with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Xiao-Ni, meanwhile, was undergoing a rigorous examination by the court's most esteemed physicians. The emperor, intrigued by this blind musician who had somehow witnessed and been touched by the ember, ordered that she be studied. The head physician, a wizened man named Master Li Wei, was particularly fascinated. The body, he declared after several days of observation, is a remarkably sensitive instrument. This young woman's perception, even without sight, appears to be attuned to energies we can barely detect. Her reaction to the heat, it's unlike anything I've ever encountered. Shen Wei, cautiously observed from his refurbished chambers within the Shen estate, felt the weight of the emperor's attention pressing down on him. He continued his quiet life, assisting Xiao-Ni with her music hall construction, supervising the artisans with a quiet intensity that hinted at the power simmering beneath his calm demeanor. He even began to subtly incorporate elements of the eternal ember into his work, hardening the sandalwood with controlled heat, creating intricate patterns that shifted and shimmered in the light. He was learning to manage the constant drain of his power, understanding that its unchecked release was a dangerous, almost uncontrollable force. One afternoon, as he was painstakingly carving a delicate dragon onto a section of the music hall's facade, a messenger arrived, bearing a scroll sealed with the emperor's crimson seal. Master Li Wei had requested a meeting. The imperial palace was a labyrinth of echoing halls and shimmering silks, a place where appearances were everything. Shen Wei, dressed in a simple, functional tunic, felt profoundly out of place amidst the richly adorned courtiers and officials. Master Li Wei greeted him with a knowing smile. "Grandmaster Shen," he said, his voice low and measured, "the Emperor is deeply interested in your unique ability. He believes you possess a key to understanding forces that could safeguard the realm." "I seek only peace," Shen Wei replied, his voice carefully neutral, "and the well-being of those I have sworn to protect." "But your ability, Grandmaster, is more than just protection," Li Wei countered. "It's a cartography of heat. You perceive the flow of energy, the vulnerabilities in metal, the building pressure before a strike. The Emperor desires to understand how you achieve this, to potentially replicate it." The implications were staggering. The Emperor wasn't simply interested in the defense of his realm, he wanted to weaponize Shen Wei's power. The thought ignited a cold fury within him, a burning resentment against the constant scrutiny, the pressure to utilize his abilities for the Empire's ambitions. "I will demonstrate," Shen Wei said, his voice hardening, "but only under the strictest conditions. I will not be used as a weapon, nor will my techniques be disseminated. My purpose is not to serve the Empire, but to find balance." Li Wei nodded, understanding the subtle threat in his words. "Very well, Grandmaster. We have brought a challenge for you. A cartographer, Master Lin, has been commissioned to map the thermal currents beneath the city. He claims to detect subtle shifts, warnings of impending instability. The Emperor believes it's a superstitious folly, but he wants you to assess his findings." He presented Shen Wei with a complex diagram of the city's subterranean tunnels, marked with intricate lines representing the suspected heat signatures. Lin claims the shifts are caused by underground geothermal activity, but the Emperor suspects something more. As Shen Wei studied the diagram, a prickling sensation ran through him, not the familiar heat of the ember, but something different, colder, denser. He felt a subtle dissonance in the energy flow, a carefully constructed deception. He followed the lines on the map, his senses heightened, the air around him beginning to shimmer with a faint, almost invisible heat. He found the source, not geothermal activity, but a hidden chamber beneath the Imperial Library, where a group of engineers, loyal to a disgraced former captain, were experimenting with a volatile chemical compound designed to induce localized seismic tremors, a potent weapon against any rival city. Shen Wei didn't need to unleash the ember to confront them. A focused pulse of heat, barely perceptible, triggered a chain reaction in the compound, causing a localized explosion that sealed the chamber, effectively neutralizing the threat. Returning to the Imperial Palace, Shen Wei knew he had revealed a considerable part of his power, not in a burst of destructive force, but in the quiet, controlled manipulation of energy. He knew with a chilling certainty that he was no longer simply a hidden warrior, but a pawn in a much larger, far more dangerous game. The Emperor desired his knowledge, his ability, and, he suspected, he desired to control him. Chapter 9. The Obsidian Mirror. The gilded cage of the Imperial Palace felt colder than usual. The air, thick with incense and unspoken anxieties, pressed against Shen Wei, a weight amplified by the Emperor's lingering gaze. Days after the events at the teahouse, days meticulously sanitized and presented as a fortuitous display of Imperial Guard prowess, the Emperor, Lai Wei, was obsessed with Shen Wei's actions. Not with gratitude, not with understanding, but with possession. Master Shen, Levi's voice, usually a silken command, now carried a brittle edge. Your demonstration was remarkable. A display of power beyond any I have witnessed in centuries. The guard, predictably, panicked. But you seized control. He gestured with a hand adorned with a jade dragon, the stone pulsing with a subtle heat. Tell me, master, what fuels this ember? What is its origin? Shen Wei, dressed now in exquisitely tailored silks, a deliberate concession to appease the Emperor's fascination, remained impassive. He answered with carefully measured words, explaining the cyclical nature of the eternal ember, its connection to the Earth's core, and its training as a focused conduit for energy. He avoided specifics, carefully omitting the true lineage of the style, the whispers of the dragon's spirits woven into its very essence. He knew Li Wei wasn't interested in history, he was interested in weaponization. The engineers, Master Shen, Li Wei continued, pacing before a vast obsidian mirror that dominated the Emperor's private chamber, were clearly attempting to replicate your technique, to harness a similar force. A dangerous ambition, wouldn't you agree? They sought to disrupt the flow of the Earth, to destabilize our rivals. A most ingenious, if reckless, design. He paused, studying Shen Wei with an unnerving intensity. Tell me, master, how did you know? The question hung in the air, a carefully crafted trap. Shen Wei realized Li Wei wasn't seeking information, he was testing him, probing for vulnerabilities. He hadn't relied on the ember to expose the schematics beneath the Imperial Library. Instead, he had used a subtly different application, a concentrated burst of heat, focused not on destruction, but on distortion. He recalled the prickling sensation had felt examining the geological survey, a dissonance within the energy flow. It hadn't been geothermal activity, it had been the residue of the engineers' tampering, a faint, corrupted signature clinging to the bedrock. It was a technique had refined over years of quiet observation, a controlled pulse of heat capable of unraveling illusions, exposing concealed energies. He had exploited their arrogance, their assumption that they were operating in secret. I observed a disruption in the ambient energy, Shen Wei replied, his voice calm, betraying none of the subtle calculations occurring within him. The engineers, in their efforts to manipulate the Earth, inadvertently left a trace. It was a watermark, a signature of their intention. Li Wei's eyes narrowed. A watermark? You speak in riddles, Master Shen. Do you suggest these men were deliberately attempting to corrupt the Earth's energy? I suggest, Shen Wei said, turning towards the obsidian mirror, that knowledge, like water, seeks the lowest point. They were attempting to create a weapon, a tool of destruction. And in doing so, they revealed themselves. He moved closer to the mirror, instinctively analyzing its surface. The obsidian wasn't merely reflective, it seemed to absorb energy. It wasn't a passive surface, it was a conduit, a carefully crafted instrument. As he drew nearer, the prickling sensation returned, stronger this time, laced with a chilling awareness. He realized the mirror wasn't simply reflecting the room, it was amplifying and distorting the energy field surrounding him, creating a localized resonance. It was a device designed to detect, and potentially neutralize, precisely the kind of energy manipulation he possessed. Suddenly, the room shimmered. The Emperor's hand, outstretched towards him, blurred. A wave of icy heat washed over Shen Wei, forcing him to instinctively retract. He understood now Li Wei hadn't merely been curious, he had been preparing a countermeasure. The mirror wasn't an ornament, it was a weapon, a sophisticated tool designed to detect and disrupt the eternal ember. You are a fascinating anomaly, Master Shen, Li Wei said, his voice laced with a dangerous amusement. A warrior who fights with heat, and a scholar who can unravel the very fabric of energy. I believe our partnership could be mutually beneficial. I intend to commission a team of artisans to construct a mirror of your own design, Master Shen. One that will be perfectly attuned to your abilities. A slow, chilling smile spread across Shen Wei's face. The realization solidified he wasn't merely a pawn. He was a spectacle, a subject for dissection. He had walked into a trap, willingly or not, and he had just discovered the Emperor's true intention to harness, control, and ultimately possess the very thing that made him dangerous. The game had changed, and Shen Wei, the quiet kitchen porter, was suddenly the most valuable piece on the board. Chapter 10. The Architect of Flame. The sandalwood of Xiao-Ni's music hall hummed with a subtle energy, a carefully cultivated resonance that seemed to soothe the very air. Shen Wei, now formally designated as the guardian of the ember by the Emperor, a title head accepted with the weary resignation of a man accepting a particularly unpleasant duty, oversaw the final touches. The artisans, a collection of the finest craftsmen from across the empire, worked with a frantic dedication, driven not just by the Emperor's wealth, but by a palpable sense of awe. They were building a temple to a power they barely understood, a power that threatened to burn everything they held dear. The interruption came not with a shout or a crash, but with a slow, deliberate approach. Li Wei, flanked by 3 Imperial Guards, men who looked perpetually uncomfortable and utterly subservient, entered the music hall, his presence a chilling contrast to the warm, fragrant air. The mirror, a behemoth of polished obsidian framed by intricately carved jade, followed him, its surface catching the light with an unsettling intensity. Master Shen, Li Wei began, his voice carefully modulated, devoid of warmth. The Emperor wishes to bestow upon you a task of paramount importance. He has observed your abilities with considerable interest. Shen Wei remained motionless, carefully arranging a cluster of jade chimes, his hands moving with a practiced grace that belied his previous role. The Emperor's interest is noted. However, I remain dedicated to my current, rather modest, occupation. Li Wei ignored the jab. The attack on the Imperial nephew's entourage was remarkably efficient, wouldn't you agree? A simple kitchen porter displaying such devastating power is an intriguing anomaly. The Emperor desires to understand the mechanisms behind this eternal ember style of yours. He wants to replicate it. Replicate it? Shen Wei finally turned, his gaze settling on the mirror with a cold, assessing look. You believe a mirror can capture the essence of a burning flame? That you can distill the years of training, the instinctive understanding, into a polished surface? With sufficient analysis, Li Wei replied, his smile sharper now, we can ascertain the principles governing your power. The energy you manipulate, the resonance you create, it's all quantifiable, Master Shen. We can build a system to predict, control, and ultimately, weaponize it. The artisans froze, their movements halting. The air in the music hall thickened with apprehension. They understood Li Wei wasn't simply interested in studying Shen Wei's power. He intended to dissect it, to break it down into its component parts, and rebuild it according to his own designs. The Emperor has tasked me with directing this project, Li Wei continued, gesturing towards the mirror with a flourish. He has selected a team of masters engineers, geomancers, even a few alchemists to work alongside you. You will be their guide, their teacher. You will teach them how to harness the fire within. Before Shen Wei could respond, a wave of discomfort washed over him. The room shimmered again, this time not with icy heat but with a subtle, almost nauseating distortion. He recognized it instantly. Li Wei was deploying the countermeasure. The mirror wasn't just a detector, it was actively disrupting the flow of energy around him, attempting to suppress the eternal ember. He didn't flinch. Instead, he took a deliberate breath, channeling the energy within, weaving it around himself like a protective shield. The air in the music hall subtly warmed, a faint scent of sandalwood mingling with the nascent heat of the eternal ember. You underestimate the fluidity of my power, Shen Wei said, his voice calm and measured. The fire within is not merely a fixed pattern. It is a living current, constantly adapting, evolving. To attempt to contain it with a rigid instrument is to invite chaos. Perhaps, Li Wei conceded, his expression unreadable. But chaos, Master Shen, can be a rather powerful weapon, especially when wielded with precision. Suddenly, a gruff voice interrupted them. Lord Zhao, one of the Emperor's most trusted generals, strode into the music hall, followed by a contingent of elite guards. Zhao, a man built like a fortress, regarded Shen Wei with a mixture of suspicion and respect. Li Wei, he boomed. What is the meaning of this intrusion? The Emperor desires a report on the progress of the Guardian study. Li Wei bowed slightly, a performance of deference that felt entirely hollow. My lord, Master Shen is demonstrating remarkable progress. He is willingly collaborating with us, sharing his knowledge, and experimenting with the mirror. He subtly gestured towards the obsidian monstrosity. Zhao's gaze hardened. The mirror. I've heard rumors. It's said to be capable of disrupting the flow of energy. A dangerous tool in the hands of a powerful warrior. Indeed, my lord, Li Wei agreed, his voice smoothly reassuring. We are taking every precaution to ensure that this technology is used responsibly. As Zhao began to interrogate Li Wei, Shen Wei subtly shifted his focus. He wasn't engaging with the general, nor with Li Wei's veiled threats. Instead, he turned his attention to the artisans, offering quiet instructions, demonstrating subtle techniques, adjustments to the hall's acoustics, alterations to the flow of energy within the chamber. He was subtly manipulating the environment, reinforcing the resonance of the music hall, preparing a defense. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was trapped. Li Wei hadn't simply offered him a partnership, had presented him with a cage, gilded with the Emperor's favor, and built with the relentless logic of a scholar obsessed with control. The game had shifted. Shen Wei was no longer a hidden warrior seeking peace. He was a weapon, a puzzle, a specimen, and he intended to play the game to his ultimate advantage. Chapter 11. The obsidian echo, the sandalwood of the music hall, throbbed with a barely perceptible hum, a resonance amplified by Shen Wei's meticulous adjustments. He stood before the obsidian mirror, not observing his own reflection, but tracing the intricate carvings along its surface with a gloved hand. The air around the mirror felt strangely viscous, almost weighted with anticipation. He wasn't trying to understand the technology. Exactly, he was testing it, probing its vulnerabilities with the innate sensitivity honed by decades of the eternal ember. Zhao watched, his expression unreadable behind the polished steel of his helmet. Li Wei, ever the anxious facilitator, hovered nervously, adjusting his silk robes and murmuring assurances. Master Shen, perhaps a more direct approach would be beneficial. We could analyze the energy fluctuations with our spectral readings. Shen Wei ignored him, his focus entirely absorbed in the mirror. He wasn't consciously channeling the ember, rather, he was allowing its power to passively flow through him. A current of heat and pressure felt deep within his bones. He felt the mirror's surface resisting, a subtle distortion of the energy he projected. It wasn't a blockage, not exactly, but a carefully constructed counter-resonance. "The device is intriguing," Zhao finally said, his voice measured. "Levi, what have you ascertained about its function? Beyond the superficial disruption of energy flow, what is its purpose?" Li Wei, visibly relieved, launched into a detailed explanation, a torrent of meticulously researched theories about the mirror's construction, a complex lattice of quartz, meticulously aligned with celestial constellations, designed to create localized distortions in the chi flow. He spoke of harmonic destabilization, temporal eddies, and controlled entropy. Shen Wei listened, outwardly polite, but his mind was processing the information differently, identifying not the mechanics, but the intent. Suddenly, a sharp, stinging sensation erupted in his fingertips. He instinctively pulled back, his hand flaring with a brief, controlled burst of heat. He saw, for a fraction of a second, a shimmering distortion within the mirror, not of energy, but of time. A brief glimpse of Zhao's face contorted in a silent, violent rage. He understood then. The mirror wasn't just disrupting energy, it was reflecting, amplifying, and weaponizing intention. Levi's attempts to control it were naive, a child's plaything in the hands of a master. The mirror wasn't a passive instrument. It was an extension of the user's will, a conduit for their darkest impulses. Turning slowly, he addressed Zhao, his voice calm, dangerously so. "Your theories are elegant, Lord Zhao, but they misunderstand the fundamental nature of the ember. It doesn't simply disrupt, it manifests." He reached out, not to touch the mirror, but to direct a focused pulse of heat towards its surface. This time, the reaction was immediate and devastating. The obsidian surface shuddered, the intricate carvings twisting and reforming in a chaotic dance. The air in the hall warped, thickening with palpable heat, and a low, guttural moan filled the room, not from the mirror itself, but from within Zhao's own body. He clutched his chest, his face contorted in agony as a wave of scorching heat seemed to emanate from his very being. Levi shrieked, scrambling to activate the containment runes etched into the floor, a futile effort. Zhao, momentarily incapacitated, collapsed to his knees, his armor scorched and smoking. Shen Wei moved with a speed that defied the confined space, stepping between Zhao and the mirror. He didn't attack, didn't even raise a hand. He simply was. The heat radiating from him was a tangible force, pushing back against the mirror's chaotic energy, stabilizing the resonance, forcing it to acknowledge his dominance. "The mirror does not respond to control, Lord Zhao," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It responds to power. And I, it seems, possess a considerable amount." He turned to Li Wei, his expression now conveying a chilling understanding. "You sought to contain the ember, but you failed to recognize its true nature. It is not a weapon to be mastered, it is a force to be respected. A force that, in the wrong hands, can consume everything." He gestured to the mirror, now slowly regaining its composure, the distorted carvings returning to their original patterns. "This device," he concluded, "is not a tool for research. It is a trap. Bite." As silence descended, broken only by Zhao's ragged breathing, Shen Wei calmly moved towards Xiao-Ni, who had silently observed the entire exchange from the corner of the hall. He offered her a small, intricately carved jade pendant, a miniature replica of the eternal ember. "A gift," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "A reminder that even in the darkest of moments, there is always a flicker of flame." Chapter 12. The Crimson Echo. The rain in the imperial city hadn't ceased for 3 days. It hammered against the tiled roofs of the Shen estate, a relentless drumming that mirrored the tension settling in Shen Wei's bones. The initial euphoria of exposing Lord Feng's cowardice, of witnessing the terrified reverence of the Imperial Guard, had begun to sour, replaced by a quiet, unsettling exhaustion. He and Xiao-Ni had spent the last 24 hours meticulously adjusting her new music hall, a sanctuary of polished wood, silken cushions, and the scent of sandalwood. The physicians, summoned from across the empire, were slowly, painstakingly, restoring her sight, their consultations a cautious dance of observation and deduction. He found her sitting by the koi pond, the jade ember pendant, her gift cool against her palm. She was listening to the rain, her fingers gently tracing the intricate carvings on the instrument she was repairing for him, a small pipa that had once belonged to her father. Her face was pale, a ghost of color struggling to return, and the rhythmic tapping of her fingers seemed to harmonize with the storm. "The restoration progresses," she said, her voice still soft, almost hesitant. "The Dr. Chen believes the damage to my optic nerves was severe. He speaks of the mirror's resonance, of how it fundamentally altered the way light itself interacted with my vision." Shen Wei shifted uneasily. The mirror, the obsidian artifact, had encountered in the depths of the Shen Merchant Guild's archives. It had been the reason for Zhao's disastrous attempt to harness the eternal ember, a dangerous experiment that nearly cost Xiao-Ni her life. The realization that the mirror wasn't merely a tool for observation, but a potential amplifier of chaotic energy, was a weight he carried with a growing dread. "It was a chaotic force, wasn't it?" he said, picking at a loose knot in his tunic. "A mirror reflecting not just the world, but the potential for destruction within it." Xiao-Ni nodded, her fingers still working on the pipa. "Like a furnace, Master Wei, burning away what is false, revealing only the raw, untamed truth." A tremor ran through the ground, coinciding with a flash of lightning that illuminated the estate in a stark, momentary white. It was followed by a muffled crash from the courtyard. Guards rushed towards the sound, their faces grim. "Lord Feng," one of them reported, breathless. "He attempted an escape. The guards intercepted him near the western gates." Shen Wei's jaw tightened. Feng, even in his diminished state, remained a dangerous wildcard. His spite was as potent as the rage of a cornered tiger. He rose, his movements fluid and deliberate, a silent promise of controlled power humming beneath his skin. "Bring him here," he ordered, his voice carrying an authority that seemed oddly out of place in the delicate setting of Xiao-Ni's music hall. Lord Feng was brought in, shackled and bruised, his arrogance replaced by a simmering resentment. He glared at Shen Wei, a venomous flicker in his eyes. "You think Juve won, little porter? Juve only delayed the inevitable." Shen Wei approached him, not with anger, but with a detached curiosity. He wasn't interested in inflicting pain, not in that moment. He simply wanted to observe, to understand. "You possess a remarkable capacity for self-destruction, Lord Feng," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's pity you haven't realized it before. You've focused on controlling the ember, attempting to wield a force you couldn't comprehend. You sought to dominate when you should have simply learned to respect." He paused, and then with a subtle movement, he focused his attention on the jade ember pendant hanging around Xiao-Ni's neck. The air around it shimmered, growing noticeably warmer. The scent of sandalwood intensified, overlaid with the metallic tang of heat. Xiao-Ni gasped, instinctively reaching out to cover the pendant. "Master, why?" "Stop." But Shen Wei ignored her, extending a single hand towards Feng. It wasn't a gesture of aggression, but of demonstration. He didn't need to touch Feng to initiate the shift. The heat emanating from him, subtly amplified by the pendant, began to build, a crimson echo of the eternal ember. Feng flinched, his eyes widening in terror. He tried to lunge, to escape, but the heat was relentless, a suffocating wave that pushed back against his movements, disrupting his balance. He stumbled, falling heavily to the floor, his armor sparking with residual heat. The room felt different now, charged with a palpable energy. The rain outside seemed to quieten, as if even the heavens were holding their breath. Shen Wei continued, not with a forceful attack, but with a controlled application of the ember. He wasn't trying to destroy Feng, but to demonstrate the absolute power he possessed, the terrifying potential for devastation. It was a lesson, brutal and undeniable. As the last vestiges of heat faded, Feng lay motionless on the floor, his face pale and slick with sweat. He stared at Shen Wei with a look of utter defeat. "I understand now," he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "You are not a servant. You heir is something else entirely." Chapter 13. The echo of embers the following days at the Shen estate unfolded with an unsettling precision. The Imperial Guard, initially wary, now treated Shen Wei with a respectful deference that bordered on awe. The investigation into the ironclad assassins had yielded surprising results, a network of corruption, reaching into the highest echelons of the Emperor's court, a consequence of Lord Feng's blatant bribery and the protection had secured with his dubious captaincy. Feng's fate was swiftly and definitively sealed, a grim reminder of the dangers of arrogance and the insidious rot of power. Xiao-Ni's restoration was progressing astonishingly well. The physicians, baffled and yet undeniably impressed, spoke of a resonance within her, a peculiar sensitivity to heat that they attributed to the pendant, a meticulously crafted piece of jade carved with ancient symbols of the eternal ember, and gifted to her by Shen Wei. The jade pulsed with a faint warmth, a comforting counterpoint to the lingering memory of the searing heat that had briefly engulfed Lord Feng. Shen Wei, however, remained largely withdrawn, spending his days observing Xiao-Ni, meticulously overseeing her recovery, and quietly refining his control of the eternal ember. He practiced in a secluded courtyard, a swirling vortex of crimson energy contained within a meticulously constructed bronze basin. He experimented with the intensity, the duration, the subtle nuances of the technique, learning to sculpt the heat not as a destructive force, but as a tool for healing, for precision, for control. The teahouse, once a scene of casual mockery and disdain, was now a place of hushed whispers and guarded curiosity. The news of Shen Wei's intervention, and the revelation of his true power, had spread like wildfire, reaching the ears of influential figures within the capital. Some feared him, seeing him as a dangerous anomaly, a weapon in the hands of a man who seemed to have no ambition beyond quiet contemplation. Others sought to understand him, to harness his abilities for the benefit of the empire. One such visitor was Master Zhao, a renowned scholar and martial arts theorist from the esteemed Jade Crane Academy. Master Zhao, a man of immense intellect and a deep understanding of ancient combat techniques, had been dispatched by the Emperor himself. He arrived with a retinue of guards and a collection of scrolls detailing the history of the Eternal Ember, a style rumored to have been lost for centuries. "Grandmaster Shen," Master Zhao said, bowing deeply, "your actions have caused considerable disruption. However, they have also reaffirmed the enduring legend of the Eternal Ember. We have studied your methods, witnessed your control. It is remarkable, a testament to your dedication." Shen Wei, seated on a simple wooden stool, offered a polite nod. "The legend is a fragile thing, Master Zhao. It is not about glory or power, but about balance, about harnessing the energy of the world for the benefit of others." "Indeed," Master Zhao replied, his eyes narrowed with a thoughtful intensity. "But potential is wasted if not explored. Your control is exceptional, but incomplete. The true mastery lies in understanding the why of the ember, not just the how." He gestured to the bronze basin. "You manipulate the heat, Grandmaster, but do you understand its roots? Its connection to the spirit, to the flow of qi?" Before Shen Wei could respond, Xiao-Ni suddenly gasped, clutching at her chest. The jade pendant around her neck pulsed violently, the warmth intensifying, a tangible wave radiating outwards. The sandalwood scent of the music hall seemed to thicken, almost cloying. Shen Wei instinctively moved, extending his hand towards Xiao-Ni. He didn't initiate the ember this time. It erupted from her. A sudden, uncontrolled burst of crimson energy. The room shimmered, the air growing noticeably warmer. A faint scent of burnt parchment filled the air, a ghostly echo of the heat that had ravaged the tea house. This time, the heat wasn't focused, wasn't directed. It spiraled outwards, touching everything in the room: the ornate furniture, the silken cushions, the scrolls Master Zhao held. The jade pendant glowed with an almost unbearable intensity. A tremor ran through Xiao-Ni's body, and she collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Shen Wei knelt beside her, his face etched with a mixture of concern and a strange, unsettling understanding. He reached out, cautiously touching her forehead. "The resonance seat's amplifying," he murmured, his voice strained. "The pendant, it's a conduit. It's drawing power from something." Master Zhao, his face a mask of shocked recognition, stepped forward. "The symbols on the pendant," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "They are not merely decorative. They are a key, a focusing agent, a gateway to the very source of the eternal ember." The crimson energy began to subside, leaving behind a lingering warmth and a faint scent of ozone. Xiao-Ni stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around in confusion, clutching the jade pendant tightly. "Master Wei," she whispered, her voice weak. "What happened?" Chapter 14. The conduits echo the silence in the music hall, now a temporary sanctuary built within the opulent confines of the Shen estate, was thick with a bewildered tension. The air still carried a ghost of the heat, a subtle reminder of the impossible event that had unfolded. Master Zhao, a wiry man with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries spent studying ancient scrolls, paced restlessly, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings on a sandalwood pillar. Xiao-Ni, pale and shaken, sat propped against a cushion, the jade pendant, a beacon of unsettling crimson light against her skin. Shen Wei remained kneeling beside her, his expression a carefully constructed mask of concern, the subtle muscle movements around his eyes betraying the intense focus he was exerting. "It's unprecedented," Zhao finally said, his voice strained. "The eternal ember, a focused expression of raw heat, is typically accessed through rigorous mental discipline, years of training. An untrained individual, particularly one with no prior connection to the martial arts, generating that level of energy, it's a divergence, a violent disruption of the flow." Shen Wei spoke, his tone carefully measured. I felt a resonance, a pull. It was as if the pendant was calling to the ember. But it wasn't a conscious invocation. It was instinctive, a reflexive response to its presence. He gently touched Xiao-Ni's arm, his touch careful, almost reverent. The heat, it wasn't me controlling it. It became her. Xiao-Ni, regaining some of her composure, weakly grasped his hand. "I don't understand. I've only ever played my pipa. I don't know how to wield fire." "Perhaps," Zhao said, a flicker of an idea in his eyes, "the key isn't in controlling the ember, but in understanding its resonance. The eternal ember isn't merely heat, it's a flow, a rhythmic energy. Perhaps it resonates with specific frequencies, specific arts music, for instance." A skeptical murmur rippled through the room. The Imperial Guard, a small contingent dispatched by the Emperor himself, stood rigidly at attention, their faces a mixture of apprehension and bewilderment. They clearly expected a rogue warrior, a disgraced noble, or perhaps even a disgruntled official, not a seemingly unassuming kitchen porter, suddenly wielding the power of a furnace. "We need to investigate this pendant," Shen Wei stated, rising to his feet. He examined the jade pendant, turning it over in his hands, studying the swirling symbols etched onto its surface. "These aren't just decorations. They're a meticulously crafted focusing agent. But why did it draw power from Xiao-Ni?" And why did it trigger such a dramatic release? He summoned the estate's most skilled artisans, jewelers, sculptors, and calligraphers, demanding a thorough examination of the pendant's construction. Meanwhile, Zhao began delving into ancient texts, searching for any mention of similar occurrences, of conduits for martial energies. As they worked, a disturbing realization began to dawn on Shen Wei. The heat, the resonance, the sudden burst, it wasn't just an accident. It felt targeted. Someone or something had intentionally manipulated the pendant to unleash the eternal ember. "The tremor," he said, his voice low. "The tremor I felt when it happened, it wasn't merely physical. It was a vibration, a shift in the very fabric of energy. I believe the pendant is acting as a key, unlocking a latent potential within Xiao-Ni. But it's not just unlocking potential, it's amplifying it." He turned his gaze to Xiao-Ni, who was now shivering slightly, the jade pendant radiating a faint, pulsing warmth. The pendant isn't merely drawing power, it's feeding on something. Something within her. Something resonant. He noticed a subtle change in her expression, a flicker of awareness, of recognition, in her normally serene eyes. Suddenly, the music hall door burst open, revealing a young scholar, Lin Yu, a longtime associate of Zhao's and a specialist in ancient artifacts. He rushed in, his face pale with urgency. "Master Wei, I've discovered something. I was examining the pendant's origin, tracing its lineage through imperial records. I found a reference to a hidden sect, the Harmonic Echoes, a group of warriors who utilized similar conduits to channel martial energies. They disappeared centuries ago, supposedly destroyed during a great upheaval." He held up a brittle scroll, its ink faded and crumbling. "This scroll details a ritual, a sonic resonance designed to awaken the echo within a chosen vessel. It describes the pendant as a stone of activation, a key to unlocking the dormant power of the eternal ember." "The Harmonic Echoes," Zhao whispered, his eyes widening in recognition. They believed that all energy, martial or otherwise, possessed a frequency, a resonance. They sought to find those who could naturally harmonize with that frequency, to become living conduits. A chilling thought occurred to Shen Wei. He remembered Lord Feng's cruel mockery, his attempts to provoke him, to break him. It wasn't merely a desire for personal glory that fueled Feng's arrogance, it was a calculated effort to trigger something within Shen Wei, to unleash a power he didn't yet understand. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a horrifying picture. Feng hadn't just been testing Shen Wei's balance, had been testing his connection to the ember. And he hadn't been alone. Someone driven by an unknown agenda had orchestrated the entire scenario, using Feng as a pawn to activate Xiao-Ni and, perhaps, to awaken Shen Wei himself. The question wasn't just about the pendant's origin, it was about who wanted to control the flow of the eternal ember. Chapter 15. The resonance of steel. The sandalwood music hall shimmered under the filtered sunlight, a testament to Shen Wei's quiet retribution and burgeoning understanding. Xiao-Ni, seated at her newly crafted pipa, played a melody both haunting and breathtaking. The intricate carvings of blossoming plum trees seemed to vibrate with her music, a subtle echo of the power she now, unknowingly, possessed. The physicians had done their work, and while she couldn't truly see, she could feel the music's energy, a vibrant hum that wrapped around her like a warm cloak. "The scroll spoke of a stone of activation," Shen Wei said, his voice measured as he watched her play. He was pacing the room, his movements radiating a contained intensity, a stark contrast to the unassuming porter had cultivated for so long. It wasn't merely a key, Zhaoda. It was a catalyst. Feng's actions weren't random, they were meticulously designed. Zhao, the wizened scholar who'd unearthed the ancient texts, nodded grimly. The Harmonic Echoes were obsessed with resonance. They believed that true martial power wasn't about brute force, but about aligning one's own energy with the inherent flow of the universe. The stone served as a conduit, amplifying that resonance. He gestured to the pendant now hanging around Shen Wei's neck, a smooth gray river stone carved with spiraling lines. It seems the echoes weren't entirely destroyed. Their influence, dormant for centuries, found a vessel in you, Shen Wei. And Feng, Shen Wei continued, his gaze hardening, was a carefully chosen instrument. His arrogance, his willingness to provoke, it wasn't about spite. He was a pressure point, a way to force a reaction. A sudden tremor ran through the music hall, a subtle vibration that resonated not just in the floorboards, but within Shen Wei himself. Xiao-Ni paused, her fingers still poised over the strings. "The stone, it responds to your emotions, doesn't it?" she asked, her voice surprisingly calm. "When you struck the assassin, when the ember flared, it wasn't simply your skill. It was the rage, the protective instinct for me." Shen Wei acknowledged the observation with a curt nod. Had begun to understand the intricate dance between control and release, the delicate balance required to wield the eternal ember. He experimented, focusing his anger, a flicker of that initial fury, as Head faced the ironclad assassins. The pendant warmed against his chest, pulsing with a growing heat. "There were others," Zhao stated, his voice suddenly strained. "I've been reviewing the fragmented records, looking for patterns. The harmonic echoes weren't just masters of martial arts, they were also skilled alchemists, exploring methods of manipulating energy fields. I believe they sought to create a sonic resonance, a wave of concentrated energy that could be directed through the stone." He unfurled another scroll, this one covered in intricate diagrams, depicting complex musical notations overlaid with stylized martial arts movements. "This chart illustrates a sequence, a harmonic progression designed to amplify the stone's power. It's unsettlingly precise. It suggests an understanding of your physiology that borders on the unnatural." Suddenly, the music hall door burst open, revealing a squad of Imperial guards, their faces grim. Leading them was Captain Li, a hardened veteran known for his ruthless efficiency. "Lord Shen Wei," Li announced, his voice clipped and authoritative. "We've received credible intelligence. There's a conspiracy brewing within the Imperial court, a plot to destabilize the Emperor's rule. Our investigations point to you." Shen Wei's expression remained impassive, but the heat radiating from the stone intensified, the air in the music hall growing noticeably warmer. "You have evidence." "We've uncovered a network of informants, all linked to Lord Feng," Li continued, ignoring Shen Wei's question. "Feng has been siphoning funds, engaging in clandestine meetings with dissident nobles. And we've discovered traces of a rare alchemical compound, one closely associated with the harmonic echoes, within his personal quarters." Before Li could elaborate, a high-pitched, almost unbearable whine filled the air. It wasn't a sound produced by any instrument, it was a raw, vibrational force, emanating directly from the stone of activation. The air shimmered, and the intricate carvings on the walls began to vibrate, the melodies of Xiao-Ni's music warping and twisting into discordant patterns. Zhao instinctively shielded his eyes, clutching his head. "The resonance. It's accelerating. The stone is responding to the ambient energy, amplifying it exponentially." Shen Wei felt it too, a dizzying influx of sensation, a torrent of raw energy surging through his veins. He instinctively reached for the stone, desperately trying to anchor the chaotic resonance, to bring it under control. The room seemed to warp around him, the music hall blurring into a vortex of heat and sound. It was then he realized the horrifying truth: Feng hadn't just been testing him, had been preparing him, unknowingly, for this very moment. And the others Zhao had mentioned weren't simply observers, they were manipulating the situation, guiding him, pushing him toward a catastrophic crescendo.